Bala, and welcome to Movie Central, the place to talk about movies, TV shows based on movies, toys based on movies, games based on movies, and theme park rides based on movies. I'm your host, Mr. CCS, and this is my pet gorilla, George. If it wasn't obvious already, I am from the United States. But we haven't been as great a country as we made ourselves to be. While there are many good things about the country, there are some notable bad ones. Terrible presidents, pandemics, racism, slavery, and war. But we also created the comic book. You're welcome. Now, when I say war, I mean really devastating wars. The Revolution, the Civil War, World War One, the Vietnam War. Many. But by far the worst of the bunch is World War Two. 6 years of uncivilized battles and many heartbreaking casualties make this the worst thing that has happened to this country. However, there were some positive things. While the men and younger and older went off to war, women and children stayed home and either listened to the radio or read some comics. One of those comics was Captain America, a super soldier and defender of freedom. After the war ended, so did Captain America. However, he would return to the comics during the 1960s within the Avengers comics. Other than the comics, Captain America, or Cap for short, was in more than you can imagine. And when I say more than you can imagine, I mean so much stuff. A 1940s serial, a turkey bootleg film, and two made for TV movies where Cap looked like more Evil Knievel-ish than Captain America. But then in 1990, we got this. Yep, a full-length feature film that totally bombed. Cringy dialogue, terrible effects, and writing, and many other problems. But then in 2011, director Joe Johnston, director of Jumanji, The Rocketeer, and Jurassic Park 3, came in and made a more superior and more faithful film based on the Star-Spangled Man. And that's what we're going to talk about today. This is Captain America, the First Avenger. Marvel's Captain America, the First Avenger, focuses on the early days of the Marvel Universe, when Steve Rogers, played by Chris Evans, volunteers to participate in an experimental program that turns him into super soldier known as Captain America. Simple plot, huh? Well, it's actually in my favorite films of the MCU, definitely in the top 10. Now keep in mind that most of the first phase of the MCU, besides Iron Man, this, and the Avengers, are littered with problems. And this is a clear example of a superhero origin film. Thor. Let's take a look at the characters. First, we have the lead. Steve Rogers is awesome. He's a brave and selfless soul who has no family to go back to. I also love the fact that he puts others before himself. He jumps in front of a grenade, he goes to save Bucky and his squad, and he ends up flying a plane into the water, even though there was a very low chance of survival. That takes guts. And that shows us that Captain America has serious balls. Peggy Carter is another character that I always find myself loving whenever she's on screen. She fights Hydra agents and plays a major role in battle, something that was rare for women during the war, and I'm glad that Joe Johnston incorporated this very historically accurate fact into the film, because it doesn't just teach young teens, but it also gives good female empowerment. Bucky, despite not being in it much, is actually pretty fun, and he also gives one of the best lines of dialogue, alongside Steve. If you've seen the movie, you know what it is. Dominic Cooper is good as Howard Stark, but you can't beat John Slattery. You just can't. Now, here are two cast members that I didn't expect to see. First, there's Tommy Lee Jones playing one of the commanders, Commander Phillips, to be exact. After seeing him as K in Men in Black, I always thought he was the right person to play someone gruff, but I didn't expect him to see in another comic book film, especially considering that the only other characters he played in a superhero movie or comic book film was not only K, but Two-Face in Batman Forever. And then there's Stanley Tucci as Abraham Erskine. He may only have a small role, but it is memorable to say the least. Alright, the villains. Let's start with Arnim Zola. Toby Jones always should play the short but intelligent villainous mastermind. And that is what he did with Zola. He may not have many lines, but he is memorable. I'm also stoked that he played the character again in the sequel and in the same parks and in the theme parks, even though some of those rides are complete garbage. But what about the main villain? Enter Hugo Weaving, aka Agent Smith, Megatron, and V playing Johann Schmidt, aka the Red Skull. At first, he looks like a human, but then he removes his face, and oh my god. What fantastic makeup for 2011, am I right? He's intimidating, ruthless, and overall a great villain. So great, in fact, that he made it into Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame 7 and 8 years later. Alright, how are the visuals? Not only are they better than Thor's, but they are pretty great. I said before that Thor's visuals were kind of disappointing. This, on the other hand, is a whole different story. Not only are the visuals used to create great location effects, but also blaster effects and the Tesseract. More on that later. The best CGI in the film is used to create small Steve Rogers, which is cool. Considering the fact that Chris Evans is tall, I am glad that the visual editors put together a nice visual that makes me shout in anger that Black Panther, a movie made 7 years later, had some crappy CGI effects. Now for the music. It was done by Alan Silvestri, who also wrote the Back to the Future soundtrack and had also collaborated with Robert Zemeckis and Marvel a multitude of times. Much like John Williams, this man never fails with what he does. And now, the action scenes. I like them all. I'll give you my 5 favorites. Number 5, the battle in the Hydra Fortress. Number 4, the train sequence. Number 3, the chase through New York. Number 2, the final confrontation between Red Skull and Cap. And number 1, Cap frees the Commandos. These are all great and some of the best action in the MCU by far. So, what's my final verdict? Captain America the First Avenger is a great example of a superhero origin story. Though not as good as Iron Man, this film has great story, great characters, great visuals, great music, and great action that make it easily one of the best in the MCU. Definitely take your time to watch this film, because if I enjoyed it, you probably would too. That is exactly why I'm giving this film a strong rating of a 10 out of 10. It may be a war film, but mixing it with superhero films makes it memorable and great as hell. Well, that's it for this review. What are your thoughts on the film? Let me know if you enjoyed it in the comment section below. Tune in next week when I take a look at the third and final installment in the Star Wars prequel trilogy. With that being said, I'm Mr. CCS, this is Movie Central, and my friends, is a wrap. See you next week.